I'm ahead of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and in today's interview, I am talking to Justin Brierley of the Unbelievable radio and podcast show. Unbelievable is mainly a Christian show, but it actually features atheists as well as theists, and not only religion, but other topics pertaining to philosophy and science as well. In this discussion today, I am talking to Justin about Unbelievable and his Christianity and how that's flourished over time because of the show. And we also have a bit of a conversation about morality and new atheism. I hope you enjoy this discussion as much as I did. It was an utter pleasure and privilege to talk to Justin. I've been a fan of Unbelievable for a number of years now, and I think my excitement might show through in me at points throughout the discussion. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy, and please remember to like, share, and comment, and of course subscribe if you want to see more content on philosophy and conversations and book reviews, anything to do with philosophy in general. Do consider subscribing. With the formalities out of the way, let's get straight into the video. Justin Brierley of Unbelievable. It's fantastic to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me on, James. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's I've been watching / listening to your show for a number of years now as an atheist. Well, I mean, for convenience, I call myself agnostic atheist, just for it not to sound too militant, as recent examples have shown us it can be. And yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant show. Maybe my favorite show to watch debates on, because I find you as sort of moderator / host, I find that you're a very balanced and humble individual, and I feel like that is a really good combination to have when doing that.
That's really kind of you to say, and I have always strived, especially since the show started being listened to quite widely by a range of people, atheists, agnostics, people of other faiths, to try and be something of a neutral presence, hopefully bringing out the best on both sides. I don't hide the fact that I'm a Christian, obviously,
yes,
and that will come through on episodes. But I'm really glad to hear that you've found it helpful in that way. Thank you.
Yeah, no, me and my dad have listened to it like many times in car journeys, and to be fair, my mum as well. Like we all like the show. And I wanted to ask, to kick things off, like, how did that start? Like, how did you get the idea from Unbelievable, and how was that kind of helped your faith? Because you talked about that before, and how has that kind of all come together for you?
Yeah, well, Unbelievable really started about 3 years after I started in radio. I was very much learning the ropes of journalism and radio presenting just after leaving university, and working for Premier Christian Radio. But the thing that they do, and I'm still, part of Premier Christian Radio, is primarily aimed at Christians. It's to kind of resource and encourage, Christians in the UK through their radio broadcasts. But I felt like there was room in the schedule for something a bit different, something where maybe we could model what conversations might look like with non-Christians. Because actually, for most Christians in the UK, that's the people they will be spending most of their time with at work, at school, family, and so on. You can't really live in a Christian bubble like you can in some parts of the US and so on. So that was where the show was born from, really. And I've got to say, before it went out as a podcast, it was just a radio show for the first couple of years, just really broadcasting primarily, to Christians who tuned in. And it was a bit of a challenge for some of them because, I was bringing on pretty cogent atheists, and as well as obviously the Christian guests opposite them. And, not everyone liked it because it was quite challenging. And, they were like, haven't we got enough atheists on the BBC? Do we need them on our Christian radio station as well? So that was a bit of a, we had to kind of negotiate that. But actually, I think it was worth it in the end. And a lot of and the people who liked it really liked it. They loved the fact that we were kind of getting outside of that bubble and doing something that was a bit different and creative. And I think the people who didn't like it just learned to skip that slot on a Saturday afternoon eventually. But what really it really started taking off in a different way once we did start podcasting. We were quite early adopters of podcasting back in 2007, this was. And once we did that and people started sharing it on blogs and things like that, especially the non-Christians I brought on, we quickly sort of started to develop a listenership that was more than just Christian, but was a lot of non-Christians and atheists and agnostics. And that would really kind of challenge me to make sure at that point that I was being, creating something where both sides could genuinely feel like they had a voice, and where I was very aware that it was a very mixed and diverse listenership to the show from that point onwards. And since then, it's gone on to have the YouTube side of it as well. And we do events, and there's been a book and so on. I mean, in terms of my own journey, I'd say it's definitely been very challenging at times, because I was very wet behind the ears when I started this. I didn't know my cosmological argument from my ontological argument or anything like that. It's been a real education in that sense. But I think what it's shown me over the years is that there are compelling arguments on both sides, when it comes to the Christian atheist thing. And I would never dismiss an atheist for their non-belief in God, if you like, because, I don't think the arguments kind of compel you in one way or the other. However, I think that there is enough, and plenty of, in fact, rational justification for Christianity from the point of view where I'm looking at it from. And I think what the show has helped me to do is kind of really come sort of to see what I think are the central arguments for God. What are the central arguments for Christianity? What some of the key arguments are against God, but where I feel you can deploy, arguments to mitigate that. And ultimately, of course, what I've discovered in the process is that, faith is not simply about having the best arguments either. It's more than that. But arguments and evidence can be an important part of someone's journey, and it certainly has been for mine as well. So yeah, I've come out in the end more confident in many ways of my Christian faith, even though I've sat down and hosted some of the best non-Christian minds and heard some of the best arguments out there against God. Doesn't mean I've got all the answers, far from it, but I do find that in the end, Christianity for me is a more satisfactory, a more compelling explanation of the world than naturalism or atheism on balance.
Yeah, no, great response. And as a follow-up to that, I'm kind of wondering, like, were there periods of mild agnosticism about big elements of your faith? Like, did you have times where you walked away from hosting this brilliant discussion and both did well, but you actually thought that maybe the skeptic or the atheist, for that matter, actually did a really good job, and you're like, maybe, I don't know, maybe that is in question. Did your faith ever kind of, I don't know, not shake, because that would be too dramatic, but did you ever have those second thoughts, those doubts at any point?
For sure. I mean, yeah, and still do, because I don't think we ever get to a point where all our beliefs are sort of rock solid, and unquestionably sort of there. So yeah, I mean, I could name numerous examples, but I remember the first time I had Bart Ehrman on, who's well-known kind of New Testament critic. He's got his own story. His book
as well. His
his latest one.
Yeah.
Well, he's so he's been on the show several times over the years now, and he's got his own story of having been, a Christian at one time, but losing his faith, and that kind of goes hand in hand with kind of the way he started to see the Bible not as, in the New Testament especially, not as the word of God, but as a sort of man-made document and so on. And the first time I had Bart on, it was to debate what probably still is his most famous book, Misquoting Jesus, which was looking at the historicity of the transmission of the New Testament documents, and are they reliable? Can we, tell what was really written down the first time round, and so on. And it shook me, when I read that book ahead of the debate that I had set up. because he made a lot of good points, or seemed to, at least, on a cursory reading. Of course, I then started to read some of the other material, response material to that, and that always helps to set some things in context. You realize people are always writing from a perspective, sometimes with an agenda, and you sometimes seeing the other side often helps to kind of put things in a slightly different frame. And that was certainly the case when we recorded the show as well. I had him on opposite Peter J. Williams, who's a noted Old and New Testament Bible scholar from Cambridge, who's a Christian. And I thought, it was a good example where actually it helped me to see both sides of the issue. And certainly, in that process and many other shows of similar nature, some of my kind of assumptions or preconceptions about the nature of the Bible and the way it came together and how it's been handed down to us over the centuries, they did get shaken, but kind of in a good way, because I think I lost some of maybe the naive assumptions Christians often come to of this kind of idea of a book that just sort of floated down ready-made from heaven. And you get much more of a sense of, okay, this is a human book in many ways. It's had the mark of many hands. It's it's a physical product of a historical process. But at the same time, I've also come to appreciate, just given that sort of the nature of what the book is, it still has this remarkable, as far as I can see, coherence. Also has a remarkable attestation to historicity in many ways, and probably not to the degree that is going to satisfy every skeptic out there, but it satisfies me. I came to the settled kind of conviction in the end, having heard both sides and read the books and done a number of these debates, that actually this is for the purposes for which it's been given us, this is a perfectly historically reliable account of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so for me, that it's sometimes a process where I will get shaken. I have been shaken in the past, but where you just have to kind of go through that. You have to live in that uncomfortable tension for a while before you kind of come to maybe this new place where you've kind of processed the arguments from this side and that side, and you've maybe landed up in a different kind of way of understanding the issues. But it hasn't caused you to kind of abandon your faith, not in my case at least. It's actually kind of given me a more nuanced, deeper, probably, understanding. And what I lose with the kind of some of the more naive assumptions maybe I had about the Bible are kind of replaced by more of a depth of appreciation for the process by which it did come to be, and the fact that we do have something so remarkable in our hands. So that's just one example of many I could give.
Yeah, I mean, it's whenever I read a book, on Islam, Christianity, of course, atheism, even though I'm already kind of in that camp, I don't know, I kind of want to assume everybody would do this, but as much as I possibly can, I try and approach it as if it will convince me, because it's not as if being convinced of Christianity is true is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if anything, atheism being true is a worse implication, provided obviously that we're accepting already, questions around God's benevolence and so on. But atheism as a implication is far more worrying than that of Christianity, as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, whether I actually want to believe it is I'm not sure. I'm agnostic about that still, but I think whenever you do those debates, I get the impression that you're genuinely open to being wrong, right? And I feel that's something that is that is prevalent in the things that you've done. Like you have, I guess you have this humility that I've said before, that it feels like you're open to understanding the other side, but also the questions you ask are just like really good to construct upon what somebody said, and you do that for both sides. And
that's very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah.
And as go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, I'm just interested, hearing what you said there, I hope, that I'm always open. I think it's great when you can cultivate a kind of, a viewpoint where, yes, I have my beliefs and I'm going to kind of act on them and live on them, but I'm not going to be completely closed off to the idea that I could be wrong. I'm not so, over the top. It would be over the top to claim that I have absolutely no, doubts whatsoever, and that I could never be wrong about these things. I mean, I was interested when you said that for you, atheism is potentially a worse sort of scenario than Christianity being true. I don't often hear that actually from a lot of atheists who obviously feel like, well, if Christianity were true, then there's a number of potentially bad things, like it might mean that if people do die, they go to hell or something like that. But I suppose my question to you is there a sense then in which you would like Christianity to be true, even as an atheist who isn't obviously convinced of it at this point?
Yes, to some extent. Of course, this is all with the assumption that by this point, by this time of admittance, I would or admission, I would be kind of clear on my queries about it, like hell. There's a question of eternal hell, and I find the idea of hell quite intriguing, because if there is an eternal hell, then doesn't that contradict God's benevolence? And so to me, the next assumption is going off of the definition of God, as it is across the monotheisms. Well, the implication is then it wouldn't be eternal, because that would contradict the benevolence of God. Now, of course, you have to assume he's benevolent, but by that point, of accepting that argument, then you already be there basically. And so look, there are quite a lot of, I mean, I'm very open, and maybe too open, because I have been criticized. I mean, this channel is in its infancy at the moment, but at the moment I'm trying to kind of talk to people that I agree with and disagree with. But the thing is, and this is kind of where watching your stuff, your shows, has kind of planted that seed of trying to avoid your own biases and ask questions that are perhaps detrimental to your own side and the other. And I feel like that's something that I'm trying to get used to.
Good on you, James. I think it's the only way you grow in the end. And one of the reasons I wanted to do, well, one of the things that came into focus, I think, once the Unbelievable show had started, and the reason why it has become quite popular in its niche, is because increasingly, as time went on and social media developed alongside, podcasting and everything, this very kind of clear kind of echo chamber sort of reality began to develop, where people ended up really only hearing from the same perspectives they already agreed with. And sadly, that is the nature of YouTube and lots of other social media. You tend to just get fed, don't you? The same kind of guests and opinions and interviews that you've already liked and watched and so on. And with Unbelievable, we're kind of have always, in a sense, tried to break that mold, in as much as we hope to always bring you to, quite different perspectives on a given issue, even within the Christian world, even, because I'm sure a lot of our discussions are actually not necessarily atheists and Christians, but they're Christians with different perspectives on issues like hell, for instance. But in the end, I think that's a very positive thing, to just simply hear perspectives that may challenge your own, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes, because actually I think you grow a lot more by doing that than simply basically being told the same thing that you already actually agree with in the first place. So that's why I think it's kind of got a unique role in that way.
I think, I don't know, I think part of the new atheism movement that was most toxic was not only its profound ability to arguably mischaracterize a lot of things about theism, and not only its religion poisons everything from Hitchens. I mean, that is hyperbole, and I get that he was a journalist, like, fair enough to that, but at the same time you have to be fair when you do these debates, and I feel like sometimes they aren't as balanced as I'd like them to be. And I was one of those people who were like, yeah, religion poisons everything. Yeah. But now I'm just like, well, it's not really as simple as that. Let's be honest here. Like everything. I mean, that is a statement that you can't really demonstrate to begin with. It's kind of unfalsifiable. And even if it was, by what metric do you even judge that? Like who Like,
Yeah.
how do you define
Yeah.
these terms in the first place?
Yeah.
And what's cool about Unbelievable is that, like you say, you're literally, if I want to listen to let's say Dennett speak, he's opposite a well-learned, educated, as much as he is, theist, and you have to kind of factor that in when you listen to Dennett. Like,
Yeah.
you can't just listen to him, you have to listen to the other person. And I feel like
Mm.
what New Atheism kind of did, I mean, to me, kind of, it was, I don't know, solidify this idea that theists are dumb, and like, these kind of things. It's just like
I
really,
agree, and I think one of the big failures in a way of New Atheism was, at the time when it was at its peak, in a way, was that many of those key characters refused to engage with the best proponents. They went for the easy targets, if you like. And I mean, we can all, go to some wacky fundamentalist church in America and film a documentary about how silly all these Christians are. But then, significantly, at the time at least, Dawkins was refusing to, gave a whole myriad of excuses not to debate William Lane Craig, who was, whether you agree with him or not, his arguments, he is and was at the time one of the most, the key sort of Christian philosophical minds at the time. So it was disappointing, because I don't think they always put their money where their mouth was. Now, some of them did, because in the end, Hitchens did a debate with Craig and so on. But I would say in my time, I managed to eventually, I've featured 2 of the 4 horsemen on the show. So Dennett a few years ago with Michael Ward.
That was a great discussion with
Keith Ward, sorry,
Keith
not
Ward,
Michael, Keith Ward, which was great. And then only very recently, really, a proper discussion with Richard Dawkins, and he was opposite Francis Collins debating.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. But this is several years on from really when the New Atheism was at its peak, and I did obviously approach these people back then. Never have been able to get hold of Sam Harris, and he's a busy guy, and I'm a relatively small fish in comparison. But having said that, I think I could count on one hand, or even two fingers, the number of substantive dialogues he's done. Again, he did do one with Craig, which was great. But, the problem is, if you're going to talk about religion a lot and, talk it down, I think you need to be prepared to do a decent amount of actually engaging with some of the best proponents of that. Sadly, never got to, before he passed away, do anything with Christopher Hitchens. And I agree with what you say about him. He was always a polemicist and a journalist. And so in that sense, he was there, you kind of, I think you always take what he said with a pinch of salt. You knew he was kind of doing it to some extent to provoke a reaction and everything. I mean, ironically, even though he was obviously, in debate and everything, this kind of rhetorician, and, he was, in my experience, he's always been the favorite of the 4 horsemen with my Christian friends and apologists and things, because actually beneath that sort of exterior, if you like, that he presented on a stage, he was actually very friendly and very personable, and actually developed a lot of quite warm friendships with some of his debate opponents and Christians and so on. Rather very unlike, I think, the other horsemen who tended to stick to their own tribe. It appeared like in his personal life, Hitchens was very willing to kind of cross the aisle and talk and, break bread with all kinds of people. And there's a fascinating little exchange between Richard Dawkins and Francis Collins on, this season of The Big Conversation.
Yeah, that was really kind of heartwarming.
That.
That clip. Yeah.
So that was just them talking about, that their shared friendship with Christopher Hitchens, and that Collins had, been able to help him during his cancer diagnosis and so on. And I think that's actually a lot of the reason why Dawkins agreed to come on with Collins on my show, because he had an enormous amount of respect for Collins as a scientist and as someone who treated his friend with such respect. But so these are all, at the end of the day, they're all people like you and me. You know, they're not just, you know, walking brains on legs. They've got their own biases and, you know, personalities and everything else. And that's the way it is with people, isn't it? But I can't remember where we began now on this, but yeah,
well,
that's the way
it was a welcome digression.
Yeah.
Can I make one comment on like my ideal two guests on your show, like as of this moment, like who I would be
put your pitch in.
Yeah, okay, so I don't know if this would ever happens, but William Lane Craig, because I respect him a lot. Like he's a hardcore like thinker, you know, about theism. I respect him a lot. William Lane Craig against Matt Dillahunty. Now, William Lane Craig has been on record, I believe, kind of to say that he stopped kind of debating people, I think, without degrees or something along those lines. And to an extent, I get where he's coming from, but considering Matt Dillahunty's track record and his clear ability, because I think he's great in logic. Like I think Dillahunty is a master in logic. Say, you know, people might say, I don't know, sometimes he might dodge things. All of these might be true, but one thing that I think anyone can be clear on is his knowledge of logic and arguments. I think he's great at that. And William Lane Craig is also really good at that. You know, in his debates with Hitchens, he had this, you know, what are they called? Syllogistic, you know, arguments, and then Hitchens just like walked on, and he was just like, "Hey," he didn't have any of that, right?
No.
And that was, I think, that was a clear difference between Hitchens and William Craig. Like Hitchens was kind of one of the guys that you talk to at a pub, and like he'd be, you know, really, you know, I love Hitchens, but he'd be really like
opinionated,
intellectual, and William Lane Craig, like you can tell he really took it seriously, and props to him for that. And I think so. Go back to Dillahunty and Craig. I think whilst Craig might hold this view of Dillahunty, I mean, that debate would, not only in my mind, but probably in quite a few of the modern atheist community, because Dillahunty is really, you know, much more popular now than he was maybe 10 years ago. But I think I just can't comprehend how telling that debate would be. You know, Dillahunty and Craig. That's my pitch.
I hear your request, and you know, I would love to see that happen as well. Now I can't make everything happen, because it's all down to ultimately people's, you know, what their priorities are and everything else.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it'd be great. I have had Dillahunty on a few times over the years, most recently beginning of 2020. There's a great show actually where I brought him on with a British Christian apologist called Glenn Scrivener for an edition of our big conversation, and they have a really good discussion on atheism and God and so on. And I thought Glenn, you know, I think Matt is a very capable debater, communicator. You know, he's not the kind of person you want to go up against if you haven't got your thoughts prepared, and you haven't got, you know, pretty good, you know, debating chops yourself. So I know for sure that, I thought Glenn did a very good job himself actually on that show. But
have you? I think I'm thinking of the right one. Is that the only one done with Dillahunty? If I just
it's the only one available on YouTube that I've done.
Yeah, is it when he's wearing like a dark, like not a yellow, but like a, I'm trying to think of what he was wearing, because I remember, like, I think of it in my head. I think it's, if there's only one, then it's the one I'm thinking of. But that debate,
it might be. I can't remember.
I've listened to it a few times since it was released. I
tell you what's really unusual about the way that one looks. I'm wearing glasses in it, so look for the debate where I'm wearing glasses. Okay. Because I managed to, like, a few days before we recorded, my child had knocked out one of my contact lenses, and I completely lost it. and I had to wear my glasses for a few days while another set got ordered. So there you go, just a small, but look, that's the one you're looking for. And all that to say, just that I can understand in a sense why Craig might say, well, look, he kind of has to choose the way he, you know, like anybody who's as in demand as he is, you know, what he spends his time on. And I just know that for someone of that ability and stature as Matt Dillahunty, Craig knows, I would have to like put away, because he does his homework,
Yeah.
and he would be putting away like a week or 2 weeks just to prepare for that.
Yeah.
And that's a big time commitment for someone like him. So I don't in any way begrudge the fact that not everyone says yes to these kinds of invitations, but yeah, I agree. That'd be a dream combo. Let's see. Maybe it'll happen one day.
Yeah, I hope so. But yeah, we've got maybe 10 more minutes if we're keeping to the.
I think we've got 15 or 20. We'll be
yeah.
all right.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking about which question to ask you. I think I had a few, but there was one that I might take priority of. So I would like to talk to you about morality slightly. And in your book, why are you still a Christian after a decade of talking with atheists? You mentioned your exchange with Dawkins and how he admitted to you that morality is effectively arbitrary. So my question is, why do you think the origin of or morality is from God and not merely the process of natural selection?
Yeah. So at one level, I think you can tell a story in which our moral values may sort of be shaped by evolutionary pressures and social sort of that kind of whole thing, where we're group cooperation and that kind of thing. I'm not saying that couldn't be the way in which that couldn't sort of guide and shape the morality we end up with, the moral laws that the question is, though, even if that were the story of how we arrived at our moral beliefs, the more important question for me is are those moral beliefs in some way binding on us? Because for me, if something to even use the label moral or morality about something, it says that that doesn't just mean it's a set of rules we agree on for the purposes of getting along with each other. For me, morality, the way most people experience it is that it's something more than that. It's about the way you should act towards other people, not just for some outcome, like so our tribe can survive or something, but because actually it's the right thing to do, regardless of any kind of social outcome that may be attached to it. That being truthful is good. Helping old ladies across the road instead of pushing them over is good. That racism is wrong. Okay. Now, so the point is that whether you think those, moral laws came from a divine source or through some process of evolution, it's the nature of the morality itself that for me points to God. Because if it's true that these moral precepts, let's call them, have this kind of oughtness about them, where they're objectively true, to use the philosophical language, rather than just a kind of subjective opinion, as it were, then if that's true, then I can't ground that on a naturalistic basis. I just don't. I've never been given a good explanation for why we should all abide by these particular moral laws, these duties and so on. Whereas I think it fits the theistic view, the Christian view, that there is a God, a moral lawgiver, who is kind of almost sort of put the moral code, the moral law, if you like, is somehow part of the warp and woof of reality, that it just exists in the same way that mathematics exists, kind of, independent of whether I happen to, believe that 2 + 2 = 4. It just is true. And in the same way, I think of morality in the same way as that. And I think actually deep down, most people, even the subjectivists, in practice, treat morality like it's that, even a real kind of relativist subjectivist who says, well, we've just created our own morality, and it's all purely a kind of social, sort of usefulness ultimately. Well, if someone comes along and punches them in the face and nicks their wallet, suddenly I think for them morality suddenly feels very objective. Like it wasn't just that person's, they really did something wrong to me. They didn't just break some social code that we sort of have generally agreed on in our culture. So that's apologies, a bit of a long answer to your question, but I think it's the oughtness, it's the objective nature of the moral duties and obligations, rather than simply how those particular moral laws happen to kind of instantiate themselves ultimately in our society.
No, I think these kind of questions are very complicated, so I don't blame anyone for explaining it in a longer way. I mean, I'm the same. I think like you there, I like to explain myself as best I possibly can, and with these kind of topics, that's kind of what we have to do. So it's interesting what you say, like the people acting as if it is kind of written on our hearts, or it being objective, and the ought thing, Hume as well there. And I'm with you, of course, until the conclusion that that it's from God. I think it's a really interesting phenomenon, though, that and it is really strange as well, because we in society, we live genuinely as if it is not a social construct. It's so embedded in our actions that it's almost just kind of assumed that that's the case. Like, murdering somebody is wrong. It's like, and then when you ask that, it's like even asking the question is an issue, for a lot of people. But it's seriously, the very why there is an issue, because those same people may not believe in God, and then when you get to the foundations of their beliefs, you find out that actually, I mean, they're inclined to agree that with this moral, subjectivism, although not relativism, in many cases. But I have always found it interesting, though, how that occurs. It's but the thing is, I would explain that insofar as it being ultimately useful for our survival and our flourishing, whether it be society, tribe, and that's kind of the origin of us doing that. And also, I agree with term management theory, a kind of a slight digression, but it's are you familiar with term management theory?
I've heard of it, but do feel free to explain it.
So it might be a bit of a digression, but it kind of encapsulates some of what this is, which is term management theory is basically the idea that everything, if not most things that we do, is in denial of death. So it stems back from Ernest Becker. He wrote The Denial of Death, which it's not exactly a holiday read. It's not a ray of sunshine coming down upon you, but it's probably one of the most important books I've ever read. And I had one of the so I had Sheldon Solomon on, who founded the term management theory, but actually stemmed back earlier. But essentially, what this ties into is the idea that maybe these things are just a sort of denial, and there are arguments like religion being a coping mechanism, which I don't agree with. I think it's not wrong, but I think it's not kind of the only reason why people believe it, because it's often thrown out there, isn't it? Like, oh, you just believe in God because you're scared. It's like, not really, to be honest. But what term management theory kind of implies is that there are not only term management theory as an idea and a theory, but there are other things in society that propel us to think as if things are true, as if acting out these suppositions. And that's my kind of version of that. Whereas yours, if I got that correctly, you're kind of saying, and maybe you were making this kind of subtle point, which is it's even strange that we have morality in some sense. Like there's such a distinction between what's positive to do and what's negative to do, and how it is so strong. But
but if I understand you correctly, then James, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but this terror management theory is I think sounds like it's, you know, another way of sort of, it's another way of coming to the conclusion that, it's a kind of social construct, not necessarily that like that we've, you know, all sat down and thought about, but that it's evolved over time, and it's you know, there's a, it kind of, it's part of the you know, the inbuilt instinct to survive and thrive, and that comes through, you know, group cooperation, and religion maybe, you know, has its part to play in the way, you know, that's allowed us to develop and so on, and in communities and so on. And that was very, you know, much the view that Richard Dawkins took actually in that conversation with Francis Collins. I think the reason I can't settle simply for that explanation is, as I said, is because it doesn't, for me, then address that kind of deep-seated sense that so many people seem to have, that morality is not just a kind of agreed current status quo, if you like, or is simply this kind of thing that is a kind of utilitarian thing that we do to enable flourishing. I mean, firstly, the question is, well, if that's the goal you're aiming for, you know, the flourishing of the human species, why that goal? Why is that the thing that we've decided we should all be aiming at? Because if someone comes along and says, well, I don't agree, you know, if Hitler comes along and says, well, I prefer the Aryan race, you know, to be the supreme race, well, you know, what are you going to say to them to say, no, you're wrong about that, without simply appealing to basically an objective moral standard?
No, I agree with that. I definitely, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But no, I definitely agree with that. Like the very distinction between good and bad is ultimately arbitrary on an objective level. But I think, and I think this is what Dillahunty discusses in the interview that we talked about briefly. But and I'm with Dillahunty insofar as like, okay, look, morality isn't objective. We have to grant that. Like, fair enough. And I also grant that, you know, to tell somebody that's wrong and you shouldn't do it, it's kind of a pointless exercise if we're going to be philosophical about it. It only just so happens we imprison people and we have a law system. And I completely sympathize with that, how it is ultimately this arbitrary system. But I guess, you know, and this is only where it works, I suppose, with the assumption for a minute that atheism is true, what other option is there? And as far as I'm concerned, we have to just do the best with what we have. And, you know, if it is down to this subjective level of determining who's guilty, who's not, provided this society is somewhat organized and reliable as a source of trust in the court system, provided this, we can come to reasonable conclusions about what people might need to experience to kind of reimburse themselves. So we use kind of utilitarianism, for example, and like utilitarianism, like consequentialism. And then, so my kind of perspective would be, hey, look, fair enough. Like, it's arbitrary, but we can only do the best with what we have. And so why don't we just use different disciplines?
And I think if you're starting from a starting point that, well, atheism is the fact of the matter, then absolutely. I think you just have to bite the bullet and say, well, yes, then morality is not objective. It's, you know, subjective, and we're just going to do the best that we can. And hey, good for you. We happen to have landed in the happy situation where we're currently living in a culture where we believe in human rights and dignity, and, you know, and that kind of thing. And we've got the freedom to disagree and to, you know, make laws about it and everything else. That's wonderful. The problem is, of course, if ultimately morality is basically decided by whoever is the most powerful and who can kind of impose their will, then, you know, and, you know, I hate to go down the Godwin's, you know, law thing, but you know, if Hitler had won and we happen to now live in a society where we all believe that Jewish people were the scum of the earth and should be eradicated, are we happy to say, well, that would just be the morality we inhabit, and that is the way it is, you know? Or is there something that says, no, that doesn't feel right, actually? Now, is that just my biases?
So I think
a Western, you know, liberal democracy, or is it because most people want to say no, it's something different to that. It's there's actually something true about the idea that every human is worth absolute, equality and dignity. And so when I and the point is, yeah, if you start with atheism, absolutely, you have to do exactly what you said. Just say we got to make the best of it. But my point is the fact that the way I look at morality makes me question atheism. It specifically makes me think atheism isn't a good explanation of morality, and that's why it's kind of, it's a point against atheism and a point in favor of theism, as far as, when you weigh things up. And that it's not just that I start from the point of theism. I think that it genuinely makes more sense, if you like, to think of morality in a theistic way.
Yeah, to be fair, I think morality does make more sense under theism. The only difference, the only distinction here, though, is theism presents, a worldview, things to follow and to believe, whereas atheism is quite literally a lack thereof or disbelief in God, one or more gods. So atheism isn't a good explanation because it doesn't try to be. So that's kind of my thoughts on that, and on the like kind of on your concern of like, where do we go from this subjectivity, and well, what can we trust, what do we do next? And I guess what I would go with is reason, like, and logic and consent. Now, of course, the question is, well, why would you even bother with those? And it's like, well, I guess as Matt Dillahunty has said before, why not, if the other option to us, theism, doesn't seem likely? It's just what we have to go with. So I will agree with you to the extent of, provided theism is true, I agree with you. But because I'm not convinced that it is, I'm inclined to, go with the lesser option. And I'm honest with this. I do think it is the lesser option. I do, because again, provided theism is true, it
is.
But
I guess the point I'm making is, yes, provided theism is true, morality makes more sense on that. But I'm an atheist, so I can't do that. Well, I guess my point is, for me, I'm giving you a reason to distrust your atheism. I'm saying that sense you have that morality shouldn't work like this, that should point you in the direction that maybe theism makes more sense of this kind of intuition you have about the nature of morality. And therefore, you should be questioning at that point your atheism, and whether, because it seems to contradict a kind of sense that actually morality shouldn't just be this kind of winner takes all kind of way of looking at the
I mean,
world.
I wouldn't like it to be, but that my preference doesn't override what I believe is evidently true. So whilst I don't want atheism's implications to be true, I'm bind to it because I'm just not convinced of the alternative, even though it's a good explanation. Or
sure.
What I mean,
well, in that case, in that sense,
one, I mean.
What I hear you saying is that I've got other overriding reasons why the bit of evidence that morality might provide me with for theism is outweighed by other reasons why I think theism is not true,
so I think, and I guess here's the distinction. Like, I think morality is better encapsulated under theism, and I agree with that. Although I guess the difference is that I'm not convinced that theism is true to go forward and act it out. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of agreeing with the idea that under moralistic morals under theism is cohesive and it's worth following. But my issue, of course, is I need to believe theism is true in order to act that out. You know what I mean? Otherwise, I'd kind of be I'd be acting out a theistic perspective and lifestyle, even though I'm actually an atheist, which gets us down to Peterson. Peterson rabbit holes.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd love to return to another point you made there, which is, well, in the, given atheism and given, the subjectivity of morality, the best we can do is kind of just use reason and logic to kind of come up with, I guess, the best that we can do or whatever. And again, my problem with that is, even if you just grant reason and logic, and actually, if we were really to go down the naturalist route, I'd even say you've got some issues there if you're a materialist determinist. I think there are
Yeah.
some
Oh yeah, for
problems, but
sure.
we'll
Yeah.
leave that can of worms
Yeah.
sealed for the moment.
Yeah.
But just taking reason and logic, okay, as a given. For me, that the problem there is that reason and logic kind of just ultimately just serves whatever end you've decided on. Okay, so I can use reason and logic if I believe in Hitler's view of the world to kind of get us there. Like I can use my reason and
But it
logic
wouldn't be
perfectly well.
consistent, I would say.
Consistent with what?
So it wouldn't kind of make, I mean, you could build an ethos around it using reason, but just because you use reason to figure out an issue doesn't mean that the conclusion of that issue or problem would be true. You know what I mean? Like,
But what? How would you even tell what the truth? I mean, because I remember in that exchange between Matt Dillahunty and Glenn Scrivener that
yeah.
Again in the issue of sort of talking about the Nazis and so on,
Mm.
we talked about the fact that they decided that they wanted to eradicate people with Down syndrome and that sort of thing. And I kind of challenged Matt to say, what's your kind of reasoning, just as an atheist, from logic and reason and so on, for why the life of someone who is, physically disabled or, mentally disabled, to kind of, and he said something along the lines of, well, we don't know what they might be able to do in the world. We can't assume that people with those kinds of disabilities can't do something good in the world. And for me, that was a problem because you're still basically treating someone in terms of the productivity or the utility that they add to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's your benchmark, if that's the thing, then fine. That if it's about people's utility in the world, then you can kind of create a logical, reasonable case for why you should treat. But actually, morality for me is the kind of morality I'm thinking of isn't really logical in that sense, because it just treats people as ends in themselves. That there's just something important about recognizing the dignity and value of every human being, no matter what their mental capacities are, even if they're an incredible drain on the resources of a culture or society. Now that I don't think you're going to get to that by reason and logic. It doesn't really, for me, that's a moral belief that you just kind of have to accept as just a fact. And it so I don't know. Does that make sense? The why the reason and logic thing kind of doesn't, it feels like you have to have decided what your moral end is, and then you just use the reason and logic around that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of truth in what you said, and it is a big issue. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would do is, I guess I'm still stuck on that reason thing. I mean, is it contradictory to say that you could reason that somebody should not have their consent manipulated or overridden, and maybe you could base that off of, again, the subjective axiom that we need to treat people well, ideally we need to treat people as equal, even though biologically they might not be. I mean, that's the distinction, right? That we're trying to kind of treat people equally. But I agree with you that this is a kind of a baseless foundation, but without one available, I mean, we can pretend all day that evolution creates that, but that's just an ought from an is, like you said very well there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, it's a non-starter. If you're looking at evolution to give, evolution just is, it just produces what, and I think Hume's right there. You will never get an ought from just pointing at what evolution does and saying, therefore, this is our. And for me, you're on a slightly better kind of wicket if you're trying to kind of get there from some kind of reason and logic. But I've had this conversation with others like, Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic and others, because, and they take the kind of Dillahunty view that, well, you just have to agree on your kind of, your thing, the outcome. It's like, they give the example of a game of chess. Typically,
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
And they talk about, well, there are good and bad moves in chess, which are simply mapped onto the objective of the chess game, and I get that. I mean, if you've decided what your objective is, then there are better and worse ways of achieving that.
Right.
But that's the whole point, isn't it? Is that we're asking, well, what is the objective? Why this objective of a flourishing, equal human cult society versus Hitler or Mao's or someone else's? You still have to kind of make an assumption, which is not simply a product of reason and logic. And then you can employ the reason and logic to get to it. So for me, I don't know. I've never been convinced that they've actually answered the question we're asking in the end.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Yeah. I mean, I think you've brought up some really interesting points, and I would probably agree with you that it is the case that maybe they haven't answered the question. But then again, is that out of bounds? It arguably might be.
And to some extent, as I say, if you just feel like atheism makes more sense overall, then, and you just say, well, this is it, we just have to choose something to aim at, and then go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Then that's a pragmatic response, and I get that. But as I said, earlier on, my point is I don't feel like I have to settle for that. I feel like actually the nature of morality and the deep-seated sense that most people seem to have that things like racism are really wrong. They're not just what we happen to have as a culture agreed on at this moment in time. That says to me there's something deeper going on here. There's something in the universe that is more than just atoms banging about. There's something about the nature of what it is to love and be loved, and to show mercy, and to and to be human, that transcends just a kind of what a kind of mindless evolutionary process happens to have handed us at this moment in time. So for me, that's I just find that a very compelling argument, and as of many famous converts like C.S. Lewis and others, for whom this was a really key reason why they converted from atheism.
I think I would question the point about innate morality as well, to be fair. Like I think I don't know, I kind of doubt that, because on one level we are genetically, well, I mean, for evolution, as I said before, like there is more of a kind of a bearing on not being immoral, whatever that might mean. But I think I think there's a lot of learning there still to be had. I mean, just because we have this innate feeling like we do to commit violence at sometimes, if we become angry, that doesn't mean that is. I think you go both ways. Like, it could be subjective, i.e., how you're brought up and your nurture, but also the nature. And I think that I'm still trying to figure this out, to be honest with you. I'm still trying to figure out how much of our moral compass is predicated by our surroundings versus our nature.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that, quite frankly. I'm not. My argument isn't you should just trust these innate feelings about morality you have, and that will give you your moral code. Right. But far from it. I think I'm sure we're all often mistaken and misled by, all I'm saying is that when we do think we've arrived at a moral belief, we tend to treat it in a way where it is absolutely true, where it's objectively true. And if you can think of one moral belief you hold, which you kind of basically think of as objectively true, then that should make you question whether you can ground that on a naturalistic framework. So
I don't personally, which is where it's problematic from my personal perspective.
Well, sure,
I mean, sure. Because I think everybody does that until they become somebody who reads a bit of philosophy and kind of looks into it more. And that for me is kind of something to raise your eyebrow at, because like if that's somewhat true, then doesn't that mean that by learning more about the facts about reality, we actually move less towards blindly following moral instincts? And that's an interesting question, because it's kind of saying, like, the more you might read about the subjectivity of everything, does that then mean your morality is less? I don't know. I think because Peter Singer.
Don't get me wrong.
Go ahead.
I'm not in any way saying that subjectivists and people who, you know, don't agree with me on the objective nature of morality are less moral. In
Oh,
fact,
of course.
some of the most moral people I meet are, you know,
it's justifying
committed
it,
subjectivists,
isn't it?
It's just the grounding of it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so that's the issue for me. And in a way, you know, I think we can get misled with the kind of whole idea of, well, how do we arrive at the right moral beliefs and that sort of thing. All I'm saying is, if you just believe in the concept of morality and that some things are right and wrong, as I think the vast majority of people do, if you press them, then you know, you have to, now, if you're a philosopher and you become convinced that no, morality is absolutely is subjective phenomenon and everything else, that's fine. You're entitled to that. I think you will then struggle, though, you know, in a world where we are constantly telling people not to do things because they're not allowed to do that. You know, what right do we have as a Western culture to tell, you know, an Indian culture where they oppress women, burn widows, and, you know, leave baby girls to die, that they're doing anything wrong? Just the way their culture has evolved. So I think it does raise some practical moral issues when you really, you know, adopt that kind of very subjectivist kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that the implications of atheism are pretty it just doesn't feel like a lot of atheists admit this, but I'm fine to admit this, like, because I'm just genuinely trying to find truth. I'm just genuinely trying to you know, see things as critically as I try and can be, and as far as I'm concerned, it isn't a good implication, practical implication, the idea of atheism. And not to say that issues of theism are out the window, still there, but all in all, I think, I mean, it's like Dostoevsky, you know, if God does not exist, everything is permitted. But I think with God also existing, everything is permitted as well, provided he, you know, tells you with his unalterable, undemocratic command to do something. So I think in both cases we're actually met with quite a difficult issue. But
well, maybe we can you know, keep the debate going another time, but it's been a lot of fun just
I really appreciate you know, bouncing ideas back with you, and you know, us trying to kind of think as constructively as possible about, you know, the atheism and theism and how they practically work in the world. Because as I said, I'm all with you that there are some serious issues here, and I feel like they're not being addressed. If I'm honest with you, like, I want more conversations like that one with Dillahunty, where I think there was a clip actually of a small clip you made of the Hitler one. I think it was that.
Pretty sure.
And that was really good. Anyway, I won't keep you any longer. I know that you have a time limit. That's all good. I just want to thank you once again, Justin. You are an inspiration to me in how I conduct myself on my channel. I'm always thinking, you know, when I watch you and kind of when I'm thinking about how to ask questions and how to avoid my biases coming in, you know, in front of me and stopping me from doing something. I just want to thank you for your show and all the hard work you've done and
that's very kind. Thank you.
How you do things.
Thank you, James. And hopefully, you know, I can get you on the show at some point and someone who can, you know, put you through your paces better than I can. That's for sure. And
that would be that would just be an unreal experience if that would ever come. But it's been really a pleasure. Great. Justin, thank you.
Lovely to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.